For this video, let's talk about my approach to building a stock portfolio. The thing about investing, it can be as simple or as complex as you want to make it. For most people, investing in an S&P 500 index fund, and only that, is adequate for building a portfolio. Investing in the S&P 500 alone is a portfolio that is already diversified, relatively cheap to invest in, and if you look at the historical performance, 11.88% compounded annually since 1957 through 2021. But here's one thing to consider. The S&P 500 is so representative of the US stock market that your performance is going to be the average market return. If you want to earn higher returns, remember one thing. In the world of investing, there is no reward without risk. And if you want to introduce more risk in hopes of higher returns, it's important that you maintain a diversified approach. As I said, the S&P 500 is good enough to be the entirety of a portfolio. It's a terrific investment, and that's why I use it as my foundation. As a foundation for my portfolio, the target weight for this is going to be 50% of the total value of my portfolio. When you use the S&P 500 as your foundation, the higher the target weight, the more closely your portfolio will mimic that of the market. The S&P 500 offers investors certain characteristics that make it such a good foundation. First, it provides exposure to large cap stocks. These are companies with very high market caps and are often referred to as blue chip stocks. These are companies that have a certain level of stability, and they're expected to be consistent in their performance. In other words, they're not wild cards. Let's take a quick look at the top 10 holdings within the index. These will be the centerpieces within your foundation. You'll notice that the top 10 are big household names, minus one or two of them. Going down the list, you have Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, Alphabet Class A and C, Google's parent company, Berkshire Hathaway, United Health Group, Johnson & Johnson, and Nvidia. Considering that most of the top 10 are big tech firms, it's not surprising that information technology is about 30% of the total index. The other big percentages are healthcare at 14%, financials at 10%, and consumer discretionary at 11%. And then you have communication services, consumer staples, energy, industrials, materials, real estate, and utilities representing the rest. Historically speaking, the S&P 500 has performed, for lack of a better word, exceptional. As I've said many times, from 1957 to the end of 2021, the S&P 500 returned 11.88% compounded annually. For those of you new to investing or you just didn't know, you can't directly invest in the S&P 500. It's an index, it's a form of measurement. So to gain exposure to the S&P 500, you're going to have to utilize either an index fund or an ETF. I personally use VOO, that's Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF, and I use it because it has an expense ratio of 0.03%. And that's ridiculously cheap for fund investing. For every $10,000 you have invested in VOO, you're only going to be paying an expense of $3. Okay, time to raise the risk level a little bit. I'm looking for exposure to more growth-oriented stocks and small-cap stocks. This portion of my portfolio will have a target weight of 30%, 15 to growth and 15 to small-cap. Starting with growth, I'm going to be using an ETF called VUG, full name Vanguard Growth Index ETF. Like VOO, VUG is relatively cheap to invest in. It has an expense ratio of 0.04%. So with VUG, you are getting 260 stocks with growth-oriented objectives. Let's take a look at the top 10. It might surprise you that some of our old friends from good old S&P 500 are back. Starting from the top, we have Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, Alphabet, Class A and C, Nvidia, Meta, Visa, and Home Depot. And as you can see, the top 10 are nearly identical. 7 out of the 10 companies are exactly the same. But what's not the same is the percentages. Just take a look at Apple and Microsoft. Their percentages are nearly double what they are in the S&P 500. And look, big tech is the epitome of what growth stocks should be, so it should be no surprise that VUG is almost 50% information technology. And it's worth pointing out that there is a lot less sector diversification. The majority of the companies only represent 3 sectors: technology, consumer discretionary, and industrials. And that's intentional. VUG is an aggressively weighted index of growth-oriented companies. In terms of VUG's history, it doesn't have the data that the S&P 500 does. and the returns since inception are currently being weighted down by this year's terrible performance. So if you look at the 10-year annualized return, VUG offered 14.18% compounded annually. I think I've clearly shown that VUG is nowhere near as diversified as the S&P 500, so why invest in it? Well, it goes back to what I said at the beginning of this video. There is no reward without risk, and diversification mitigates risk. Some things gotta give when you're in pursuit of higher returns. Am I okay with a big portion of my portfolio being allocated to big tech names? Given my risk profile and my belief in technology, yes. Yes, I am. For small caps, I'm going to use ETF IJR, full name iShares Core S&P Small Cap ETF. Staying consistent with cheap investing, IJR's expense ratio is 0.06%. First and foremost, why would I want small cap exposure? They're generally lesser known names and they are a lot less stable. Well, two reasons. First, these small companies have exponentially more room to grow than the large caps. The problem large companies encounter after they reach a certain size is they begin to approach a growth ceiling. Small company versus large company. It's much easier to double $1 million in revenue than it is $1 billion. The second thing that makes small cap companies attractive is that they are generally the target of M&A, mergers and acquisitions. So although small cap investors may be forced out of their positions, at least they'll receive a premium. Getting back to IJR, what do you get when you invest in it? Well, you get 678 small companies. Looking at the top 10, I noticed two things. One, lesser known names, and two, not top heavy. And if you look at the sector breakdown, you'll notice that percentages are much more evenly distributed across different industries. And what I really like about this is that financials is the top sector. I know that financial services is no longer the darling child it used to be since the financial crisis, but it's hard not to invest in companies whose sole objective is to make money. Turning up the risk level another notch, I also invest in individual stocks. And here's the most important thing. I only allow this portion of my portfolio to be 15%. And of that 15%, I never allow a single stock position to be greater than 5%. And why do I strictly cap single stock positions? It's not just the risk, but also the time involved. To pick individual stocks the right way, it's going to require a lot of your time, not just for due diligence, but also monitoring that position after you own it. You're going to have to do a lot of research, looking at financials, looking at competitors in the same marketplace, and most importantly, thoroughly understanding the business. If that sounds like a lot of work, it is. So why do I do it? The truth is, and I wish I had a better reason, I do this because it introduces some fun into the process. I enjoy studying individual companies and trying to identify what potential lies within. But seriously, if you're thinking about picking individual stocks, please know the risks. For the cherry on top, I do a bit of educated speculation through option leaps. Now, leaps are too complex to fully dissect in this video, but I need to mention it because it is part of my portfolio and I want to be fully transparent. LEAPS stand for long-term equity anticipation securities. These are just options contracts that expire longer than a year from now. And LEAPS introduce one major thing to my portfolio: leverage. Based on complex options pricing, LEAPS contracts offer the ability to control 100 shares at a cheaper cost than buying the 100 shares outright. This difference in cost is the leverage. Given that the contracts turn profitable, you've amplified your returns. Anytime you're dealing with derivatives, which options are, remember that you're dealing with possibly the highest risk profile. Not only can a contract expire worthless, but you're also introducing market timing, which, as I've said before, is a cardinal sin. So don't ever get things twisted. I recognize that 5% of this portfolio is speculation. And with that, time for a recap. As an investor, I have a higher risk tolerance, so I'm going to search for higher returns while still abiding by the principles of diversification to mitigate that risk. So I build a pyramid portfolio based on the risk profiles of each portion. My foundation that represents 50% of the portfolio is S&P 500. The next 30% of the portfolio I allocate 15 to growth and 15 to small cap. I then give myself 15% of the portfolio for individual stock positions. As a strict rule of thumb, no single stock position can represent more than 5%. And at the very top, I give myself the last 5% of the portfolio to do some speculation with option leaps. Remember that for most people, the S&P 500 is more than enough. If the S&P 500 is the only thing you ever invest in for the entirety of your life, you're a damn good investor. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So before we go, here's my question. Do you invest in more than just the S&P 500? If yes, what? And that's all I have for today. As always, thanks for watching. Until next time, take care of yourself, and best of luck.